Hey everyone, welcome back to Trek on the Tube. Today I bring you a video that might fuel some arguments. I hope not though. I hope we can all just analyze Star Trek as friends, as fans, and have a healthy debate. I did want to take the time to say that the community we have on this channel is really great. I know the Star Trek 4 video generated some hate towards the Kelvin timeline, but at this point that video is kind of its own thing. The other videos on this channel have less views and are home to the subscribers, and you're a really great group. Thank you very much. I'm very happy with the community that's coming together. I mean, except for Bob, of course. Bob's an asshole. So as you've seen in the title of the video already, today we're going to talk about the different Star Trek timelines. Yeah, I know, big topic, and it isn't going to be easy to address. So in order to structure the video a little bit, I'm going to break it down into two big explanations. Number one, the current canon explanation. This is the official way both CBS and Paramount are selling the Star Trek universe. Number two, my explanation, which, and I do not say this lightly, is not canon, but should be. I've talked about this with other fans before, and I'm not the only one to believe this is a more valid explanation. Also, Simon Pegg has a similar theory, but more about that at the end of the video. Okay, so explanations 1 and 2. 1 is canon, 2 is not, but should be because it's more logical. Before we get into this, let me remind you that Star Trek has been around for over 50 years. There are currently 13 movies and 6 television series, all of which have been written and directed by very different people that each have their own interpretation and views when it comes to time travel, parallel universes, etc. This means that a lot has happened, and it's very difficult to define specific rules about time travel and parallel universes in Star Trek. However, it has been done. And those rules reveal to us the existence of the Star Trek multiverse, which is something much more complicated, much more abstract, and much less canon, so we're not going to talk about that today. I only mention this because we're going to use one of those rules for explanation number 2. Now here's some general facts that apply to both explanations. Star Trek is home to an infinite amount of timelines, some very different to each other, some very similar, but there are only 3 that we've seen on multiple occasions. The Prime Timeline, the Kelvin Timeline, and the Mirror Universe. The Prime Timeline is where Star Trek began. It's home to all of the TV series and the first 10 movies. The Kelvin Timeline is where the 3 most recent movies take place, and the Mirror Universe is a parallel universe that has been visited a number of times on the shows. What you need to understand is that these timelines aren't more important than any of the others. They're just part of the rest. We think they're more important because they've had more screen time. Okay, explanation number 1. Now the way it's presented to us in canon is all the events from the original series to Nemesis took place one after the other in the Prime Timeline, with the exception of a few self-contained stories. Kirk and his crew went on their 5-year mission, followed by a few other adventures we got to see in the movies. A good 70 years later, Picard does his thing on both the small screen and the big screen as the events shown in Deep Space Nine and Voyager take place. It's all very straightforward. Yes, Bob, I know. Star Trek V and Star Trek VI came out after The Next Generation had begun, but they take place before The Next Generation. It's not very important, to be honest. What is, however, is on a few occasions during the original series and Deep Space Nine, some of our beloved characters discover the existence of the Mirror Universe, and sometimes even cross over to their timeline. So going back to what we said earlier about infinite timelines, the Mirror Universe and the Prime Timeline both coexist in parallel with each other among all of the infinite others. Then comes Enterprise, a story about events that take place 100 years before Kirk's mission. Still Prime Timeline, with a few Mirror Universe episodes showing us that even back then, both realities already existed side by side. Now all this becomes a little more complicated when we get to the Star Trek 2009 movie. You see, Nemesis took place in 2379, and it's explained in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek that a few years later, in 2387, Romulus was destroyed and Spock and Nero were flung back in time. The current canon explanation says that Nero appears in 2233 and that his arrival, or his actions upon arrival, cause a new timeline to be created, a sort of divergence. This is the Kelvin timeline. And it's in this timeline that the latest movies take place. So if you look at it this way, you see that Enterprise is a prequel to both timelines, and Discovery shouldn't be, because it's said to take place around 2255, a good 30 years after Nero's arrival and impact. That's what CBS and Paramount are selling us, and yeah, it can work, but there are problems in the details, and that's just it. This is an explanation given to us not by the writers, but by executives that don't look into the details of storytelling. All they wanted was for people to accept the new films and not be responsible for erasing the rest. So they just announced the timelines diverged here and that the new alternate reality created was called the Kelvin Timeline. But that's not enough, Bob. When you take the time to look at the details, it doesn't make sense, Bob. Come on, sit down, Bob, and listen. Listen to explanation number 2, which I find is a lot simpler and makes a lot more sense. I believe that all 3 timelines exist parallel to each other among all the infinite timelines and have been that way long since before Nero ever went back. The way I see it, Nero and Spock didn't just go back in time. They went back in time but arrived on another timeline altogether. How can I prove that? Well, let's just take a look at all of Star Trek ever. Even with over 50 years of content created by hundreds of different people, one important detail in storytelling has always been respected. If something looks one way at one point in time, and you time travel back to that point in time, it will look the same. If you time travel back and it looks different, you're in an alternate reality. For example, in the Deep Space Nine episode Trials and Tribulations, Benjamin Sisko and his crew go back in time from 2373 to 2268. They find themselves on Kirk's Enterprise, which looks exactly as it did before. Another example is the Next Generation's Time's Arrow Parts 1 and 2. The crew goes from 2368 back in time to 1893, which, apart from the out-of-phase time-traveling aliens, looks exactly as it should. An example of going back in time but finding yourself in another reality would be Enterprise's Stormfront Parts 1 and 2. Temporal Agent Daniels sends Archer and his crew back to 1944, in which they find a Nazi-occupied United States. It's explained to our heroes that a temporal Cold War is going on, that the past has been altered, and so they're in an alternate reality. Now take this truth and apply it to Star Trek 2009. When Nero appears in 2233, he finds himself looking at this ship, the USS Kelvin. The way it looks, with the huge nacelle, the glowing deflector dish, the uniforms the crew is wearing. None of that fits into the pre-original series timeline. It all looks too different. Similar enough, but different. Just like the Mirror Universe. Also, think about Khan. Khan Noonien Singh was part of the human augment program that took place in the 20th century. This is true for both Khans from both timelines. Yeah, both Khans. They're different. If the timelines had diverged in 2233, why would Khan be any different? It's not just a question of recasting. The character doesn't think or act the same way. Both are physically enhanced and very smart, but they're not the same person. Also, Krall in Beyond mentions fighting the Xindi War. In the Prime timeline, there was no Xindi War. There was a battle at most, but definitely no war. So conclusion? The Kelvin timeline cannot be a divergence from 2233. It's a timeline that must have existed before any of that. Before the USS Kelvin, before the Xindi War, before the 20th century and the human augments were selected. Now we don't have enough information to say when it began. All I'm saying is it wasn't in 2233. Simon Pegg addressed this himself in something he wrote on his website. I'll put a link in the description so you can check it out. But here's a quote. Spock's incursion from the Prime Universe created a multi-dimensional reality shift. Okay. The rift in space/time created an entirely new reality in all directions, top to bottom, from the Big Bang to the end of everything. As such, this reality was, is, and always will be subtly different from the Prime Universe. His explanation is slightly different in the sense he believes that Spock's temporal anomaly is what created this timeline in the first place. I don't necessarily believe that's true, but what we can agree on is that there was no divergence in 2233. The Kelvin timeline has clearly been around since longer than that. By the way, Simon Pegg wrote Star Trek Beyond, so going back to what I was saying earlier, to me, writers make the canon. Okay, well, that's about it. I hope this helps. If you have another explanation, please let me know, although the YouTube comment section isn't really the best place to talk about this kind of topic. Remember, the first explanation is canon, so whether you agree or disagree with it, that's just how it is. You have to live with it until one day they might change it. Again, I think it has its flaws, but, you know, whatever. I know there's been a lot of Star Trek Discovery news recently. I'll address that in my next month's update video. And in a couple days, I'm gonna give you a very special video celebrating 50 years of Star Trek and 2,000 subscribers. I didn't do anything for the 1,000, so 2,000 it is. As usual, thank you very much for watching. Comment, subscribe, share with your friends, and most of all, live long and prosper.